I come from Malaysia. I live in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It's about 4 degrees north of the equator. Malaysia now has a population of about 25 million people, and most of them are beginning to flock to the city centers. So Kuala Lumpur has become quite dense over the last 6-7 years. In architecture school, we are taught to understand that context involves the site, east sun, west sun, the direction, whether there's a hill in the distance, the views, the slope of the land. But for me, this context it's part of what I think Frampton and so on is called critical regionalism. To me, context is more than that. It's something I call specific context. And specific context is the fact that just with only 1 degree of latitude separating them, the lichen that grows on the trees in Singapore is green, whereas the ones in Kuala Lumpur are orange. It's about drains that operate to completely different effect in, say, Jakarta and Beijing. That in Beijing, all the drains collect water into huge canals, which they use whenever there's a drought. They can use if there's a drought, whereas in Jakarta, that water is completely polluted, and there are organisms living in there that can only thrive in toxic conditions. So specific context is what enables me as an architect to begin design. Sometimes we feel, well, not sometimes, I think also in education we are led to believe or educated to believe that design begins in your head, and then it's this amazing creative act of expression. But I believe design begins with specific context and understanding of conditions which inspire then a solution. Because without a question, which comes from specific context, there can be no answer. So that's what I believe the relationship is, and that's why context is so important to me. It drives all my decisions, or at least I try to have it drive all my decisions. Products are, because they're inherently stable, are given the greatest degree of commercialization or marketing, or as you know, for economics. Processes, on the other hand, are so governed by small changes in where they are, and in what changes happen within where they are. But there's a big difference also between a process and a critical process, where a manufacturing process is not a critical process. It is designed to avoid change. It is designed to eliminate any form of error. So even a manufacturing process is designed like a product. But a critical process, say in the growth of a tree, it's governed by the smallest change in its environment, in its specific context. And because of that, critical processes are very, very volatile. They're almost impossible to market or to find trade in commerce. And for that reason, they are not commercially viable. So whenever someone who wants to engage the sale of a critical process, they always try to transform it by elimination of change into a process or a product. This, I believe, is what's happened to the profession of architecture, that it ceased to be seen as a critical process, subject to the change, with the smallest change with its context. We assume that we are able to transplant and transmit design which are predicated in similar ways as a manufacturing process in different contexts, regardless of where we go, having forgotten that it is a critical process. And like language, it changes even with the distance as small as a different valley, like say in China. It might be considered one language, but if you examine it from it being mutually exclusive, there are about 700 different languages within the same region in China, as is in India. Language, like architecture, is a critical process, and it's impossible not to have it find change with the smallest change in its surroundings. The raw materials are specific to the context of Malaysia. They are most commonly found. They have been there for the last 50 to 60 years. And I find that when materials have been in one particular building culture for that long a time, the people that work with it are comfortable with that material. They don't have to learn a new way of doing something. And I like being able to do something new, or something which sees in a new way a traditional method or way of doing things, which is already comfortable in that place. So it's that excitement of doing something, of making something special from something normal. I could attempt to do something with new materials too, but perhaps also it's a lack of comfort on my part, that a new material has got so many unknowns to it. And because it's new, it perhaps hasn't been tested as long globally as a material which has survived the ages. And this is not to say that the materials I work with are the right way. It's just the way that it feels most comfortable to make something special out of. I love doing things with my hands. Ever since I was young, I love taking apart and putting together bicycles, that were predicated on the old, beautiful steel bicycles the Italians used to make in the 50s and 70s, 60s and 70s. So using my hands to make things with wood and all that, I appreciate what effort it can take sometimes. And when I try to imagine a detail or design it, I'm always trying to think, is this going to be easier for the fabricator to make, for the steel man to weld? Is it going to be easy for him to bend? Is it going to be easy for him to coordinate with the carpenter with wood in order to make the joint comfortable to assemble? So all these issues to me are part of the specific context of the building culture that fabricates and manufactures the things I design. And for that reason, it becomes important to me. A lot of times also we forget that someone is doing this work, whether it's cleaning a drain or cooking some food. And I always ask, what if it's my mother or my father who's doing this, or my son or my daughter? And suddenly, when you think of it in that way, it changes completely what design is. Because your empathy tends to be a bit more profound maybe, and you try to design not just for the end result, for the product, but to make an easier, perhaps, process. There's an interesting, a fantastic Sufi proverb. When I was in Pakistan, a professor of Sufi studies came up to me, and she said she enjoyed one part of my talk where I spoke that nothing kills creativity or integrity quicker than success. And she says in Sufism, there's a proverb. It says, if you want to destroy a man, praise him. And this, what she said, is very similar to what I've said, but what that Sufi proverb does, it goes to your heart so much more immediately. Destroy. It's not irritate, annoy, piss off. No, it's destroy. It's a complete annihilation. Praise. It's not shoot, kill, cut, maim, rape or murder. It's praise. To put these two words together, it represents completely the problem of the human condition. That the moment you know you're being seen or you're being watched or looked at, it completely changes the way you behave. And it is intrinsic to human nature to have this happen. This issue of morality is something which is rarely addressed, but I feel morality changes the way you do a work. And another professor of education, Professor David McCullough Jr., said in a graduating lecture for high school students in Wellesley College about 4 years ago, I think. It is a lecture to commemorate the graduation. It was called You Are Not Special. And in this lecture, he said, don't climb mountains so the world can see you. Climb mountains to see the world. And I think he hit on a very important point there, is that your knowledge of who is looking at you and where your destination is can completely change your journey and your development as a human being, and more is important as a creative person. And I think this issue of morality is something we don't hear often enough, because it changes the way we understand design. And that's what I think ethics and morality is about.